Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
Chapter 9. Shifting Lines. 12 hours of sleep had done little to ease the weight on Loid's mind. He woke with a jolt, not from a nightmare this time, but from the now familiar pressure deep in his abdomen. That urgency again. Another reminder that mass couldn't just vanish. It had to go somewhere. His bladder felt smaller, compressed by organs that were rearranging themselves into new configurations, the anatomy of his lower body undergoing its most dramatic shift yet. He sat up slowly, blinking at the soft morning light, filtering in through the high windows of the medical wing. The room swam into focus gradually, his vision slightly different now, sharper in some ways, his peripheral awareness heightened in a way he couldn't quite explain. Everything around him still felt slightly too large. The bed, the room, the world. No, he was just smaller. And changing faster now. His body felt strange against the mattress. Softer points of contact, weight distributed differently across his frame. When he shifted, unfamiliar parts of him moved in tandem, the small breasts on his chest bouncing slightly with even the smallest motion. The sensation was disconcerting. Mass, where there had never been mass before, pulling at his skin with gentle insistence. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, the hospital-issued garments brushing lightly against his skin. The fabric clung differently today. Looser at the shoulders. Tighter at the hips. The hem of the pants now pulled around his ankles, his height reduced by nearly 4 inches overnight. He could feel it, the way his center of gravity had continued to shift. He walked with more sway now, not out of choice but simple anatomical truth. His steps felt lighter, his feet smaller within the standard issue slippers. His balance was different too. He found himself unconsciously adjusting his posture. Shoulders back slightly to compensate for the new weight on his chest, hips tilting to maintain equilibrium. The bathroom door loomed ahead. He moved with purposeful steps, one hand unconsciously brushing the longer strands of hair that tickled the sides of his neck. His fingers froze. Hair. Long. Not just longer. Dramatically different. Where yesterday there had been the beginning of dark strands, intermixed with his natural blonde, now thick tresses fell past his ears in silky waves of deep black. The texture was different too, finer, silkier, with a natural sheen that caught the light. He stepped into the bathroom and turned to glance at his reflection in the mirror. Shoulder length. Silky. A deep black now, with only the faintest traces of his old blonde clinging to the ends. It framed a slimmer face, still his, but narrowing. Softer jawline. Fuller lips. The bridge of his nose had refined, subtly more delicate. His cheekbones seemed higher, more pronounced, creating hollows beneath them, where shadows played across skin that had paled dramatically overnight. His eyes were the same color, but their shape had changed, larger, with thicker lashes, and a subtle upturn at the corners that gave them an almost feline quality. Yor's eyes. Looking back at him from a face that was increasingly hers. But the most jarring changes were in his body. He pulled off the garments as he sat down, not bothering with modesty anymore. There was nothing left to hide from himself. The fabric slid from shoulders that had narrowed considerably, revealing a frame that had lost all traces of its masculine angularity. His torso was sleek, toned but petite, his waist cinched in a way that was unmistakably feminine. Where once his ribcage had formed a solid rectangular block, now it tapered dramatically, creating an inward curve that flared back out at his hips. The muscle definition he'd spent years perfecting had softened, smoothed over with a layer of subcutaneous fat that gave his skin a different texture entirely. His hips had rounded further, and his thighs now pressed together at the top. The bone structure itself had reshaped, widening his pelvis to create the distinctive female silhouette. His legs had changed too, muscle mass redistributed, calves more shapely, ankles more delicate. His butt was, undeniably fuller, cushioned against the seat in a way that had never existed before. And then his chest. Small, but there. Bumps yesterday. Breasts today. Modest, but visible and growing. They rose and fell gently with each breath, resting against the curve of his chest, like they had always belonged there. The skin there was paler, more sensitive, with small pink nipples that seemed to harden at the slightest draft. When he moved, they moved, a constant reminder of what was happening. He brought a hand up to touch one hesitantly, fingers tracing the unfamiliar curve. The sensitivity was startling. Even that light contact sent a strange sensation rippling through his chest. Not unpleasant, but utterly foreign. "Christ," he murmured, his voice catching him off guard. Higher now, softer, with a melodic quality that hadn't been there before. Not quite Yor's voice yet, but no longer recognizable as Loid Forger's either. He exhaled slowly, dragging his eyes down. Past the narrow waist that cinched in dramatically, past the flare of hips that had widened overnight, to the most fundamental change of all. His manhood was still present, but barely. Shrunken to the point where it seemed more like a remnant than anything functional. A detail on its way out. The process of inversion had begun, the tissue gradually retracting, reshaping, preparing for its final transformation. Between his thighs, the first subtle changes were visible too. Skin softening, folding, creating the first suggestion of what would soon replace what was being lost. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, head in his hands. His fingers wound through hair that was too long, too soft, too dark, Yor's hair growing from his scalp. When he inhaled, even his breathing felt different, shallower, higher in his chest, his lungs compressed by the reshaping of his ribcage. His voice was barely a whisper. Almost gone. The realization hit him with physical force. He was more than halfway there now. More female than male. More Yor than Loid. In another day, perhaps less, the transformation would be complete. Irreversible, at least until they developed the counteragent, if they ever did. He finished up in silence, cleaned himself with practiced routine, and pulled the garments back on. They hung differently than they had even yesterday. The pants slid down his narrower hips, despite the drawstring pulled tight, and the shirt hung loose around his shoulders, while stretching slightly across his new chest. He caught his reflection again as he turned to leave. Something between, and yet closer to her than ever. The features were unmistakably taking her shape now. The delicate nose, the high cheekbones, the subtle curve of her lips. His body language had changed too, without conscious thought, his stance narrower, his movements more fluid. When he reached for the door handle, his arm extended with a grace that felt entirely unfamiliar. Just as he reached for the door, he heard voices from the hallway, the soft murmur of medical staff, boots on tile, the scuff of a rolling tray. "Remarkable progress overnight," came Dr. Halvitz's excited voice. "The cellular adaptation has accelerated beyond all projections. At this rate, we're looking at complete transformation by tomorrow morning. And the reversal compound." That was Sylvia's voice, cool and clinical as ever. "Still in development," Halvitz replied, his tone slightly less enthusiastic. "The theoretical framework is sound, but we need more data on the stabilization phase before." "I don't need theories, Doctor," Sylvia cut in. "I need guarantees. Agent Forger has given everything for this mission. We owe him a way back." Of course," Halvitz agreed hastily. "But the transformation itself is the priority right now. Once it's complete, we can focus on." "Both are priorities," Sylvia said firmly. Double the team working on the reversal compound. I want options, not excuses. The check-in team. They were coming. Loid took a deep breath, feeling his altered chest rise and fall beneath the thin fabric. A strange calm settled over him, not acceptance exactly, but resignation. He was too far gone to turn back now. The only way out was through. His hand moved to the doorknob, fingers more slender now, nails slightly longer. Everything about him felt foreign, as if he were piloting someone else's body by remote control. The disconnect was profound, yet with each passing hour, the new sensations became more familiar, more integrated. Just part of the mission, he whispered to himself, his altered voice still jarring to his own ears. Just another disguise. But it wasn't just another disguise. It was becoming his reality. His body, his voice, his face. The person he had been was vanishing, replaced cell by cell with someone else entirely. Loid took a breath, hand resting on the cool metal handle of the bathroom door. Another step closer. Another part of him left behind. He turned the handle and stepped out to meet what he was becoming. Chapter 10. Clinical Realities. The bathroom door opened with a soft hiss of air pressure, and Loid stepped back into the hospital room. The motion itself felt different, his altered body moving with unfamiliar fluidity. Each step requiring subtle recalibration to maintain balance with his dramatically shifted center of gravity. The medical staff were already inside. 3 doctors, 2 assistants, and Dr. Halvitz himself, standing near a rolling monitor cart equipped with an array of scanning devices. They all looked up as he entered, and for a moment, no one spoke. Their eyes did the talking. A collective silent assessment, clinical yet undeniably tinged with fascination. Halvitz's eyes widened behind his glasses, his clipboard drooping slightly in his grip. Even the usually impassive lab technician with the iron-gray hair seemed momentarily taken aback. Even the usually unflappable Halvitz paused, taking in Loid's appearance. The longer hair, the softened features, the subtle curvature of hips and chest, beneath the loose hospital garments. It was clear the transformation had accelerated overnight. The changes were no longer subtle hints of femininity. They were dramatic, undeniable reshaping of his entire physical presence. Agent Twilight, Halvitz said, after a beat, his tone unusually gentle. You've made significant progress. Is that what we're calling it? Loid replied, his voice catching him off guard again, higher, softer, with a melodic quality that made the sarcasm sound almost musical. I'd have gone with alarming metamorphosis, but I suppose progress works too. One of the assistants blinked, then cleared her throat. How are you feeling? Any pain, nausea, cramping, neurological haze? Loid shook his head slowly, still adjusting to the way his hair brushed against his neck when he moved. The sensation was foreign, dark, silky strands caressing skin that seemed hypersensitive, as if every nerve ending had been recalibrated to register stimuli more intensely. No pain, he said, his voice softer, edging up in pitch now. Just disorienting. Like walking around in someone else's body. More like someone else's body is walking around with you inside it, muttered one of the younger doctors, before receiving a sharp look from his colleague. Halvitz nodded sympathetically. That's expected. Your proprioception, the sense of where your body is in space, is recalibrating. You'll feel off balance for a while, but it'll stabilize soon. He gestured to the center of the room. We need to conduct a full physical examination. Please stand in the evaluation area and remove your garments. Loid hesitated, only for a moment, before nodding. The training kicked in. Professionalism. Routine. What do you have now? He moved to the center of the room under the overhead light and slipped the loose garments from his shoulders, letting them fall to the floor. The air felt different against his altered skin. Cooler. More present somehow. His body registered temperature differently now, a subtle but persistent reminder of how fundamentally his physiology had changed. Goosebumps rose on arms that were dramatically slimmer, the muscle definition reshaped into lean, elegant lines rather than the taut cords they had once been. He stood still, arms slightly out, feet shoulder-width apart, though now that distance felt wider than it used to. His stance naturally narrower to accommodate his reshaped pelvis and altered balance. Naked under the clinical lights, the extent of the transformation was impossible to ignore. His body had become a hybrid, predominantly female now, with only faint traces of his former male physique. His chest had developed into small but definite breasts, perfectly proportioned to his new frame. His waist cinched dramatically inward, before flaring out to hips that had widened substantially overnight. His thighs had filled out, skin smoother and paler, with that characteristic softness that was unmistakably feminine. The doctors circled him like sculptors examining a half-finished statue, their gazes clinical but unable to fully disguise their amazement at what they were witnessing. Height has decreased by another 4.3 centimeters since yesterday, one of them noted aloud, measuring tape extending from Loid's head to the floor. Current estimate, 163 centimeters. Almost exactly matching target parameters. Pelvis has widened significantly. Hip-to-shoulder ratio is approaching target range. Observed another, taking measurements with digital calipers. The pelvic tilt has adjusted, creating the classic S-curve of female posture. Breast tissue development is progressing naturally. Estrogen levels are within calibrated parameters. No signs of hormone shock, reported a third, examining a readout from a handheld scanner. Mammary development appears to be matching target size exactly. Remarkable precision in the genetic template expression. Muscle distribution has shifted. Quadriceps and gluteal mass increasing subtly, consistent with Yor's profile, noted the technician, palpating Loid's thigh muscles with gloved hands. Reduced upper body strength, compensated by increased lower body stability. Typical female power distribution, particularly for combat-trained individuals. Facial structure is nearly aligned. Jawline and brow ridge still undergoing final reshaping, observed Halvetz himself, tilting Loid's chin with clinical detachment. The cheekbones have achieved full prominence. Reshaping is 92% complete. Lips have attained target fullness. Loid remained still, absorbing each word like a distant echo. Detached. Clinical. He forced himself to compartmentalize, to treat this as merely another mission parameter, another body modification, no different from the scars he'd accumulated over years of fieldwork. But this was different. Scars were additions. This was transformation, the wholesale replacement of everything he had physically been. He felt like a test subject, a living sculpture. Each comment about his body, a chisel stroke, carving away what had been Loid Forger, and revealing someone else beneath. Genitalia inversion is approximately 80% complete, noted the female doctor, her voice matter-of-fact as she conducted the most intimate part of the examination. Testicular retraction complete. Penile tissue has nearly fully inverted, forming the initial structure of the vaginal canal. External labia forming normally. Clitoral development derived from penile glands tissue appears to be proceeding, according to target parameters. Loid inhaled sharply at this assessment, the clinical description of what had happened to the most fundamental aspect of his male anatomy, hitting him with visceral force. It wasn't just the loss of his manhood, it was the creation of its opposite, the most quintessentially female anatomy forming where his male parts had been. Something to say, Agent Forger? Asked the doctor, noting his reaction. Just wondering if there's any part of me you'd like to leave out of your fascinating anatomy lesson, Loid replied, his higher voice giving the sarcasm a cutting edge. Science doesn't benefit from euphemism, she replied evenly. Your body is undergoing the most revolutionary transformation in medical history. Every detail matters. And yet, in a strange way, he understood. This was the price of the mission. Of precision. Of survival. His body had become property of the mission, the vessel for an operation larger than him. Larger than Yor, larger than their strange artificial family. At last Halvitz stepped back and tapped a few final notes into his tablet. "That will do for now," he said. "You're at approximately 75% completion. The rest will finalize gradually over the next few days." Loid raised an eyebrow. Another gesture that felt different now. The muscles moving differently across a reshaped brow. "So I'm not done becoming her?" "Not entirely," Halvitz replied. "But the transformation has progressed far enough that we can begin your next phase." "Tactical training," one of the assistants added. "Voice modulation. Movement replication, reflex conditioning. We want to make sure when you move, when you speak, when you fight, you're Yor." "I can already fight," Loid pointed out, one hand unconsciously moving to cover his chest in a gesture of modesty that surprised even him, an instinctive response to his altered anatomy. "Not like Yor," the assistant replied. "Your combat style was built around your male physicality. Upper body strength, longer reach, higher center of gravity. Hers is entirely different, speed-based, rotational power, lower center of leverage. Not to mention you'll need to learn to fight in heels," added one of the doctors with a small smirk. "Fantastic," Loid muttered. Because being turned into a woman wasn't challenging enough. Halvitz gestured toward the far corner of the room, where a neatly folded stack of black and red clothing sat on a small chair. "Please change into the uniform provided and meet us outside. Your training begins immediately. We don't waste time." The staff filed out, leaving Loid standing alone. He picked up a towel from the nearby table and dried himself with mechanical efficiency, trying not to pay too much attention to the unfamiliar curves his hands passed over. His body felt alien, softer in places, more substantial in others, with a completely different distribution of weight and sensation. When he reached for the clothing, his arms moved differently, the musculature altered, the joints more flexible, the skin smoother against the fabric. Even this simple action required recalibration, his brain still catching up to what his body had become. He turned to look at the clothing. It wasn't just a uniform. It was her uniform. Fitted black combat gear. Red lining. Streamlined and sharp. The gear Yor wore on her most dangerous assignments, form-fitting tactical fabric designed to allow maximum movement while providing subtle armored protection at key areas. The first real step into becoming someone else. He held up the outfit, measuring it against his altered frame. It would fit. Of course, it would fit. His body had been deliberately reshaped to these exact specifications, molded to match Yor's proportions with scientific precision. The implications were unavoidable now. This wasn't just a physical transformation, it was the assumption of an identity. Not just looking like Yor, but becoming her in every measurable way. Moving like her. Fighting like her. Speaking like her. Being her. He stared at it in silence. The uniform hung from his hands, black fabric gleaming under the clinical lights, red accents like veins of blood running through shadow. Yor's signature colors. Her armor against the world. And now, it seemed, his. Or perhaps more accurately, hers again, worn by a body rebuilt to be an exact replica of the original owner.